Heavenly greetings to you all, our faithful listeners. I welcome you back to the next section of our YouTube audio cord, still on the book titled Effective Teaching, a Radical Professional Approach for Theological Educators in Africa, written by Prof. Ezekiel Edumo. We shall be getting on to section 3, which has to do with effective instructional practices. This chapter again, or this section rather, covers 3 chapters, chapter 7, 8, and 9. Let's get on to the reading. Chapter 7, Designing for Impact, Curriculum and Lesson Planning. Introduction. Curriculum and lesson planning are foundational to effective theological education. In Africa, where theological formation must intersect with complex sociocultural realities, economic pressures, and spiritual hunger, curriculum design is not merely an academic task, it is a missional and contextual responsibility. This chapter explores the principles and processes that undergird impactful curriculum and lesson planning for theological educators, highlighting the importance of setting clear objectives, contextualizing content, and remaining responsive to learners' needs. It also draws upon the work of contemporary scholars and practitioners in theological and educational disciplines. Setting learning objectives, theological clarity, and practical focus. Effective curriculum begins with clear, measurable learning objectives. These objectives must go beyond academic content to include spiritual formation, ministry skills, and contextual application. According to Biggs and Tang 2022, constructive alignment is key. Learning outcomes, teaching methods, and assessment must all align to promote deep learning. Biggs and Tang teaching quality learning at university. While their work is primarily in secular higher education, their emphasis on coherence is profoundly applicable in theological settings. In the African theological classroom, learning objectives must also incorporate holistic formation. As Mutaf Zindi and Baloyi 2023 argue, African theological education must balance knowledge with praxis, spirituality with relevance, and theology with social responsibility. Gotten from Journal of African Theological Thought. Bloom's taxonomy, widely used across disciplines, remains useful for theological education. Educators should design objectives across cognitive, affective, and psychomotor domains. For instance, cognitive, students will be able to articulate the Pauline theology of grace. Affective, students will demonstrate a reference attitude towards scripture and its authority. Psychomotor, students will practice basic sermon preparation using expository method. Setting objectives like these ensures that students are not only informed, but also transformed. Subsection 2. Curriculum design for Bible and theology, beyond content transmission. Theological curriculum should never be a mere transfer of doctrinal content. It must be dynamic, integrative, and missional. Wendland and Lumomeku 2021. Curriculum design for Bible and theology, beyond content transmission. Theological curriculum should never be a mere transfer of doctrinal content. It must be dynamic, integrative, and missional. Wendland and Luba Nkole 2021 emphasized the need for African theological education to be biblically rooted, contextually grounded, and community-oriented. Bible translation and transformation in Africa. Effective curriculum design in theology must 1. Foster biblical literacy and hermeneutical competence. 2. Develop theological reflection that is both faithful to scripture and aware of African realities. 3. Encourage missional engagement with society, politics, and culture. 4. Equip students for vocational ministry in diverse contexts, rural churches, urban centers, diaspora communities. Van den Berg 2020 critiques many African curricula as Eurocentric in form and outdated in pedagogy. He recommends modular competency-based curricula that empowers learners for immediate ministry engagement. To apply this, theological educators should 1. Use modular frameworks with flexible pacing for bivocational students. 2. Integrate field experiences directly into course plans. 3. Encourage local theological articulation, inviting students to reflect theologically on cultural practices. Example, rites of passage, traditional healing. Contextualization and relevance, making curriculum speak to African realities. One of the most critical challenges in theological education is contextualization, adapting curriculum to reflect the lived experiences, cultural narratives, and missional needs of African students and communities. Kwame Bediako, posthumously cited in recent studies like Ngwaibu and Chukwuemeka 2021, insisted that African Christianity must not be content with borrowed theology. He urged for a curriculum that listens to the soul of the African and wrestles with local questions, syncretism, poverty, witchcraft, gender injustice, and political oppression. Mbaya and Banda 2023 contend that contextual theology must be built into the curriculum, not as a supplementary course, but as a framework that shapes all theological disciplines, Studia, Historia, Ecclesiastica. For example, a doctrine class on sin and salvation should address not only Western theological categories, but also indigenous notions of guilt, shame, and ancestral bondage. A class on church history should highlight African church movements, African martyrs, indigenous revivalist leaders. A Christian ethics course should explore contemporary African issues like corruption, tribalism, and migration through a biblical and theological lens. Educators must also remain attentive to current events, pandemics, political transitions, economic crises, and ask how theology must speak prophetically into these realities. Practical steps for curriculum and lesson planning. A. Curriculum mapping. Start with a broad curriculum map for your program or course. Identify 1. Core courses and their outcomes. 2. Prerequisite knowledge and skill progression. 3. Integration points, examples, spiritual formation, retreats, field work, community engagement. B. Weekly lesson planning. Use a template that includes 1. Topic and biblical text. 2. Objectives for the session. 3. Teaching methods, lecture, discussion, group work, etc. 4. Assignments or reflections. 5. Evaluation points like quiz, peer feedback, and journalism or journaling. Graham Cheeseman 2021 in his recent handbook for theological teachers suggests a rhythm of input, interaction, and integration in each class session. This means alternating between content delivery, learner engagement, and spiritual application. C. Learner involvement. Use planning techniques that are learner-centered. Invite student feedback on what topics they struggle with. Include student-led devotions or presentations. Encourage reflection journals or ministry application plans. Challenges and opportunities in African curriculum development. Challenges. 1. Limited resources like text, digital access. 2. Overcrowded curriculum with outdated materials. 3. Language barriers and literacy issues. 4. Faculty shortages and burnout. Opportunities. Digital platforms and open source theological materials. 2. Partnership with African Theological Network, example, ACTE and NET. 3. Inclusion of vernacular languages and oral traditions. 4. Local theological authorship and storytelling. Mokoniora 2022 highlights the use of storytelling and proverb as theological method. Curriculum must engage the African way of knowing, not just the Western way of writing. Conclusion. Designing curriculum and lesson plans for theological education in Africa is a sacred act, an opportunity to shape minds, hearts, and hands for the glory of God, the good of communities. It demands theological fidelity, educational innovation, and deep contextual sensitivity. When done well, it produces graduates who are biblically grounded, spiritually matured, and socially responsive. The radical teacher in Africa must become not just a planner, but a prophetic designer, crafting educational journeys that empower the church to think theologically and live missionally in the African context.